America's most famous tourist destinations. Are there suspects in the United States legally? That and more when we return.
No, that's not what we're supposed to be doing. Meanwhile, in Boston, a recreational center in a predominantly black and brown neighborhood was transformed into a shelter for immigrants overnight. Boston Democratic City Councilor Erin Murphy recalls what locals say about the decision.
Why are other people getting things when we need them here in our city?
Boston is a sanctuary city. Massachusetts is the only state in the country with a right to shelter law, meaning it has to provide housing to anyone who needs it. Murphy tells NTD it might be time to take a closer look at those laws.
It doesn't make you a bad person because you're questioning how much can the state take, how much can our city handle before we have to really shut down and take a good look at what are those effects. And if they're negative effects, we have to decide, is that something we want to continue to do?
The governor of Massachusetts said she is looking at alternative sites to house the immigrants, but that there are none available at the moment. Ariane Pastar, NTD News.
Help is on the way for Texas as the state deals with the southern border crisis.
Impact on minority communities. We spoke with Jerron Smith, former deputy assistant to President Trump on domestic policy, about how these forgotten communities are suffering. Jerron Smith, thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Illegal immigration, it's obviously a huge issue in all of our major cities right now, not just along the southern border. Most recently, in the city of Boston, right in the heart of Roxbury, you have the Reggie Lewis Recreation Center, and that was a center that was built for the black community there, and it's now being taken over by the government, the local government, to house illegal immigrants. The people of Roxbury aren't too pleased. What do you make of this?
Well, I would be upset, especially being a part of a community. You build something to help your children and help make a difference for your community, only for that to be intercepted by individuals who are essentially jumping the line and taking benefits and resources from people who need it. The issue with the border, it's more than just the public safety piece. It's capacity to really help people. America hasn't done a good job of creating infrastructure for opportunity for its Americans. And so to expand those capabilities to Americans who aren't citizens, we're just not at that place right now, especially post-pandemic. And so I follow the America First agenda, which is putting the American people first, especially forgotten communities like the one that you mentioned in Boston. We need to make sure that they have first access, but also opportunity. And having a centerpiece being taken over by people who are only here because of lack of government putting the right resources in place to prevent so many illegal immigrants from coming into the country.
Jerron, if you could, talk to us about the America First agenda and what it actually did for those forgotten communities that you mentioned.
We had President Trump usher in an agenda that wanted to roll back some of those policies that made America less competitive. And instead of other countries being able to benefit from different trade deals, he wanted to create trade deals that helped the common American, that created jobs here, that brought back the whole concept about American-made goods and being able to have our goods be, bar none, or the top in the world. And we do that by putting the right policy regime that incentivizes investment here in the United States. That also is looking at some of those communities that have been decimated because of those loss of jobs. If you look at what they call the Rust Belt in the Midwest, many of them were affected by bad trade policy, as you saw steal jobs and go overseas. Or if you're looking in the South, and you're seeing their lack of manufacturing, all because we had bad trade policies that didn't benefit America.
Right now, you're seeing in the polls, former President Trump is gaining with black Americans in the polling. There's also the issue of enthusiasm. So you might have Trump up in the polls, but the ones that voted for Biden or may vote for Biden, they also have to be enthusiastic to come out. What do you think are going to be some of these issues that determine 2024?
Well, I think that more than ever, the issue around immigration has become a big issue for communities of color, because as you mentioned, in places like Chicago or Boston and New York, you're seeing a huge influx of illegal immigrants at a time where you have growing prices, you have lack of opportunity, you have other groups of people who are competing for those same opportunities, and that also creates other issues such as cost of getting a job, how much they may pay you. And so I think the immigration issue is going to be extremely important, but also the feel of the economy. You hear the Biden administration talk about how their policies working, but most everyday Americans aren't feeling it. They're not feeling it at the gas pump. They're certainly not feeling it at the grocery store, and certainly with the cost of rent.
Jerron Smith, really appreciate you joining us.
Thanks so much.
Coming up, President Biden and leaders from both the Republican.
A group of illegal immigrants attacking two NYPD officers in New York has been making headlines. How has the current bail and sanctuary status been fitting into this? Help us understand that.
Well, this incident, I think, paints the perfect sort of picture in a bad way of what America's law enforcement officers are dealing with. These officers not only were encountered by aggressive, apparently illegal migrants who had entered the country illegally, nevertheless were in New York awaiting for some hearing that might take place in 10 years or so, and feel perfectly free to attack uniformed NYPD officers right there in Times Square. And there's that. There's the immigration issue, but then also there's the issue of it. These officers, and you can tell they're dealing with these. They're being attacked, first of all, and they're not even. You can tell they're afraid to use any force at all on the first gentleman that attacked them in order to make an arrest, because New York has this diaphragm law that prohibits officers from placing any pressure on a person's chest while they're being arrested. And you can see how that comes into play here, where the officers are being very, very careful, more careful than they should be if they're interested in protecting themselves. And then third, you have the issue of cash bail, which even after these people are arrested and they enter the criminal justice system, even though they're in the country illegally, even though they've attacked law enforcement officers, they're let right back out on the street just to do it again. And at least one of them already had a record of a prior arrest. So it's very troubling on all those levels.
On the note of law and order, what measures are in place to ensure that there is justice regardless of immigration status?
Well, I think most people would argue, certainly I would argue, that if you're in the country seeking asylum and you attack law enforcement officers, that you should simply be removed. It should be that simple as a remedy, and we shouldn't have to wait for some removal hearing. There should be a quick hearing, and then the individual should be removed. If they were in the country lawfully, even if they were in the country lawfully, there should be swift and certain consequences. Due process, of course, but one who attacks a law enforcement officer in the way that we see clearly on this video, they should be charged. They should be held pending their trial because of the risk that they present to public safety, and then there should be accountability in the form of a sentence of incarceration, and it's that simple.
Now, these released illegal immigrants were then seen flipping off media cameras. How should the city respond to such behavior?
Well, the act of flipping off a camera, of course, is constitutionally protected, but I think it does, it tells the casual viewer how the contempt that these folks have for our law enforcement, even for our communities here in the United States and New York City. One of the most, by the way, one of the most racially and ethnically diverse cities on the planet. And so it has nothing to do with national origin or anything like that. But if you're gonna come to the United States, if you're gonna go to New York City, you need to respect the laws, and we need to have a system that demands that respect for our laws and for our law enforcement officers.
On that note, New York's Governor Kathy Hochul is suggesting deporting these individuals. Now, New York City is a sanctuary city, so how does New York balance public safety while housing all of these immigrants?
Well, I think we all can admit to seeing signs of hypocrisy in the sanctuary city, not only New York City, but other so-called sanctuary cities. That it's very easy to call yourself a sanctuary city when you've not been flooded with migrants. And now cities like New York and Chicago are receiving significant numbers of migrants in the city, and they've openly complained about how difficult it is to be able to address the resource needs of these migrants. And so some of the rhetoric has started to change. So while I wholeheartedly agree with the governor that these people who attacked our law enforcement officers should be removed from the country, this should be the impetus for a more serious conversation about how we treat people who have illegally entered the country generally, and start to walk back some of this idea of having migrant cities, sanctuary cities, sanctuary counties, and other jurisdictions, because in reality they should all these cities should be cooperating with the federal government as the federal government attempts to enforce our immigration laws.
And how do activities like these immigrants, illegal immigrants attacking police officers, impact those who are in the country genuinely seeking asylum?
Well, it's a bad look. Obviously, it gives the impression that every single person who is a migrant, or even every single person who's
putting up razor wire, doing other things to keep illegal aliens out, I want to be helpful with them doing that. I don't want to be part of the federal government trying to tear down these barriers and let more people in illegally.
Florida is prepared to deploy up to an entire battalion of its National Guard, which is around 1,000 soldiers. It will also deploy members of its own state guard for the first time. This, in addition to the more than 90 officers from other Florida law enforcement agencies. The goal is to help Texas strengthen the barricades and razor wire at the border. 27 states have formed a coalition to help Texas deal with the influx of illegal immigrants. Florida has been directly assisting Texas to secure its border since 2021. It has already sent more than 700 members of the Florida National Guard. In his speech, DeSantis again criticized the Biden administration for the border crisis. He said Florida is helping to, quote, stop the invasion of illegal aliens. Hours from now, we could see details of the Senate's bipartisan border deal. This as House Republicans intensify their resistance. NTD's Melina Weiskup is on Capitol Hill with the latest developments.
Bill will soon be released. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer saying they plan to post the full text of the bill as early as tomorrow and no later than Sunday.
These challenges at the border and in Ukraine and the Middle East are just too great.
The leader is pushing for a vote by next week. But with growing opposition to the deal, it's unclear how much Republican support it will get.
You're asking me a question I can't answer right now, which is what is the fate of it?
House Republicans stand in strong opposition to it, pointing to rumors that it would allow for thousands of illegal crossings.
So they want to allow 1.8 million individuals to still come into the country. You're legalizing the illegal activity that's taking place.
Is that it allows for 5,000 entrants per day. That's a non-starter. I don't even know why the Senate thinks that's a starter.
Supporters, meanwhile, have tried to debunk this claim.
So it's never been about codifying 1.8 million. That's patently untrue. It will be proven untrue in the text.
Even if it can pass the Democrat-controlled Senate, its fate is grim in the House. Speaker Mike Johnson saying bluntly it has no chance of getting a vote. Democrat Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries leaving the door open to taking matters into their own hands.
Would you consider trying to get around Speaker Johnson if he doesn't bring it up to the floor?
We have to evaluate the substance of the legislation before we decide the best procedural course of action.
Now, the broader question here is if they aren't able to get this border security deal to President Biden's desk, how will Congress move forward with aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan? Reporting from Capitol Hill, Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Meanwhile, representatives in the House passed a bill to deport illegal immigrants who are caught drunk driving. Nearly 60 Democrats joined Republicans to approve the measure, while about 150 voted against it. In the UK,